as well. People bowing to this gold statue that represents Nebuchadnezzar himself. And Shadrach and Meshach have already determined they're not going to bow. They realize what's going on, and they said, no, we can't do that. And there's some people that see them and essentially tattle on them. And so I'll start there in verse 12. Here's those people talking to report to the king. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Why would these men be quick to, as we could say, tattle on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Yeah, jealous, because these are Jews who had come in and take positions of leadership and responsibility in the kingdom, and it's like those should be all reserved for us. So there would be definitely a jealousy factor. Verse 13, then Nebuchadnezzar in rage and anger gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you will not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? When a time like this comes, and they had a little bit of advance notice that it was coming, and often we do as well if we're going to be coming into a time when our faith may cost you. Let me ask you this. In what context of life might you encounter an occasion where your faith could cost you?
I think the most common thing's ridicule.
No, I mean, in what context of life?
Your job.
Okay, your job would be, what would be an example of how that might be true in your job, Landis?
Well, you're stuck in a position to where you could be promoted or not promoted, and your boss puts a lot of pressure on you to do one thing, and you know you shouldn't do that, and you have to make that decision whether you want to stand with Christ or you want to obey your earthly.
Okay, yeah, required to do something dishonest, or maybe you see somebody else do something dishonest and they're higher up the ladder than you, and it's like, if you know what's good for you, you're going to shut your mouth. I had an occasion when I was right around 20 or so in Chicago. I worked for a company, and I worked in the shipping department, and after a little while I got to be the head of the department. But the people that were my bosses and higher up, they had all kinds of things that they did that was unlawful, and it was a very awkward place to work. And some of those kinds of things I encountered. Where else? The job would be definitely a case. Where else? Situations where your faith might cost you if you stand up for what you know is right.
If you participate in athletic activities or any other activities that are held on Sundays regularly.
Okay. Anything that essentially removes you from the local church, which is getting increasingly common in our day. Anything else?
I was just thinking like college education, higher education a lot of the time, it's hard to exercise your faith there because a lot of people don't want you to.
Okay. Yeah, well, I know Derek, well, there was a lot of situations where you write or do a paper or something, and if you think this is a good opportunity to be honest about what they're asking for and share my faith, and then it good chance the teacher doesn't appreciate it and you get graded down for just not espousing the views that are politically correct and most popular there. I'll mention one other one, and we wouldn't think this would be the case, but it certainly would be. It could well be that in your church you'd have an occasion where your faith may cost you. Maybe somebody's doing something dishonest in the church, or you saw something and it's like, do I do the right thing? Or maybe it would mess up a friendship, or somebody else was getting mad at me or whatever. And essentially, I think there's any context in life could be in a case where our faith is going to be tested and it'll be costly to do the right thing. In this case here in Daniel, we don't have the actual prayer of Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, but in their words, they give us 4 principles that are very valuable in shaping what the prayer should be. And that's what we're going to look at tonight. Notice, let me read verses 16 through 18 here. It's right after Nebuchadnezzar says, "Who is there that'll deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." So again, 4 principles. The first one is cling to your faith in God. In a time when it's going to cost you, the easiest thing to do, and unfortunately a fairly common thing to do, is for people to just back down from their faith and say, well, you got to do what you got to do. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to get someone else in trouble. In the case here in verse 17, the men make the statement, "Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us." They're saying that right in the face, actually to the face of King Nebuchadnezzar, who, humanly speaking, he's the most powerful man in the world. And he certainly has the authority to just say, hey, take those 3 guys and throw them in a furnace and burn them to pieces. There's no question that he has that authority. But right to his face even, they say, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. Cling to your faith in God. Focus on him is what we see here. His will, his purpose, his power, his glory. And then leave the outcome as well as the means in his hands. If you were one of those 3 guys, it would be very easy to be scared half to death and think, oh my goodness, we're talking to him right now, and in a very short time, they're going to play this music again, and he's going to know what we do. And we can tell he's really mad. Verse 13, it said, Nebuchadnezzar in rage and anger gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their focus is not on the king and his power and his wrath. Their focus is on God here. Our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. It's not disrespectful or anything, but it's just to say, hey, our confidence, our faith is in God, and we're going to hold on to that. Secondly, maintain a spirit of positive expectation. Notice again in verse 17, they go from our God whom we serve is able to deliver us to he will deliver us out of your hand, O King. In verse 17. Critical thing there, Our positive expectations must be based on spiritual discernment. God doesn't deliver every faithful believer. He doesn't heal every disease. Sometimes people say, well, I have such and such a disease, but I ask God and I know He's going to heal it. It's like, yeah, maybe you do, maybe you don't. He certainly has the power to heal diseases, but He doesn't heal everybody's cancer, everybody's heart disease, or whatever it would be, blindness, deafness. He doesn't deliver everybody that's in trouble. Stephen, for instance, we looked at a few weeks ago, God allowed him to be stoned to death. How could they speak with such confidence? He will deliver us out of your hand, O King.
Ultimately delivered if God didn't rescue, they would still be with God.
Well, they would. That doesn't really seem to be where they're coming from there, but yeah, we need to pray believing and leave it in God's hands. Sometimes God does give us a pretty strong measure of confidence that He's going to work something out on our end. And based on what they said, I would have to have the conviction here that God did reveal to them, you're going to survive this. Or otherwise, I don't know how they could have said it. If I was fighting some disease and I said, well, I know God's going to heal me because I prayed about it and asked Him to, basically I'm lying if I say I know He's going to heal me. I think that God probably did reveal that to them. But in addition to that, and this maybe ties in with what Hung was saying, it helps to remember God's commitment to the believer in Romans 8:28. If Jean was here, I'd let her jump on that because she shines in these moments, but it's the one. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good for those who love Him, for the ones who are called according to His purpose. He works all things together for good to the ones who love Him, for the ones who are called according to His purpose. I want to share this story with you, and I've used it a couple times, so if it's familiar to you, then I'll ask you to forgive me, but I think it's still helpful. A wise old Chinese gentleman lived on the troubled Mongolian border. And one day his favorite horse, a beautiful white mare, jumped the fence and was seized on the other side by the enemy. His friends came to comfort him. "We're so sorry about your horse," they said. "That's bad news." "How do you know it's bad news?" he asked. "It might be good news." A week later, the Chinaman looked out his window to see his mare returning at breakneck speed, and alongside her was a beautiful stallion. He put both horses into the enclosure, and his friends came to admire the new addition. "What a beautiful horse," they said. "That's good news." "How do you know it's good news?" replied the man. "It might be bad news." The next day, the man's only son decided to try riding the stallion. It threw him, and he landed painfully, breaking his leg. His friends made another visit, and all of them sympathetic, saying, "We're so sorry about this. It's such bad news." "How do you know it's bad news?" replied the man. "It might be good news." Within a month, a terrible war broke out between China and Mongolia. The Chinese recruiters came through the area, pressing all the young men into the army. And all of them perished, except for the Chinaman's son, who couldn't go off to war because of his broken leg. "You see," said the gentleman, "the things you considered good were actually bad, and the things that seemed to be bad news were actually for our good." Or, as Hudson Taylor, the missionary, put it, "Ill that God blesses is our good, and unblessed good is ill. And all is right that seems most wrong, if it be His sweet will." the point of all that is to say, we do tend to judge things prematurely. You know, if something happens and it's against what I hoped for and wanted, and it's like, oh, that's rotten news. And maybe we judge too early. Who knows? There might be a really good reason God held us back from that activity or whatever it was. And there's a lot that goes on that we don't know. And so in maintaining a spirit of positive expectation, it's to say, I know the Lord's going to look on me for good in this. I think we can definitely say that because that's what he promises in Romans 8:28, if we belong to him. Jacob, we're in Daniel 3. The third principle here is to submit your will to his will. And you'll notice that in verse 18. And here they cover the thought that maybe God won't do what we think he will. But even if he does not, they've already said he's able to deliver us, he will deliver us, but now it's even if he doesn't. In other words, we're confident that he will because we trust his character and his ability, and we think we understand his purpose in all of this. But humanly speaking, we can be wrong and make mistakes and be sure we have God figured out, and surprise, what we thought we knew isn't reality. And that's what they do here. Submit their will to God's will, submit your will to his will, with the statement, even if he does not. And the point here is we don't always understand his purposes and intentions as well as we think we do. I think a great example, we actually looked at this some weeks back, was when Moses doesn't want to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt, and God kind of twists his arm to get him to do it. And it's like, I don't really want to do this. And finally he gives in. And so humanly thinking, if I was God, I would make it as easy for Moses as I could right from the beginning. God does the exact opposite. And Moses was thrown for a loss. It's like, and that's why he goes to God and grumbles and cries and says, ever since I started to follow you, things didn't get better. It got worse and worse and worse. Would God do that? Yeah, apparently. He had a purpose in mind, but Moses wasn't tuned into it, and same thing can happen with you and me. I like this statement from Earl Stanley Jones. He said, prayer is surrender. Surrender to the will of God and cooperation with that will. If I throw out a boat hook from a boat and catch hold of the shore and pull, do I pull the shore to me, or do I pull myself to the shore? Prayer is not pulling God to my will, but the aligning of my will to the will of God. In other words, sometimes we think, well, if I pray enough, I'll convince God that I'm right, and he'll bend to what I want. And prayer is really aligning my will with his will. It's being sensitive to his purpose and his will, and essentially embracing that. Last one, so far we got cling to your faith in God, maintain a spirit of positive expectation. Number 3, submit your will to his will. And number 4, commit to do what is right. And here you got, again in verse 18, even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. It's like, even if you burn me up and I see the furnace there with the door open and here's 3 big bulky soldiers ready to fling me in, I'm still not going to worship your gods and do the things that I know are wrong. It's saying, we think God will deliver us. He's able to deliver us. We're confident He will deliver us. Even if He doesn't, we will not serve your gods. We're still going to do the thing that we know is right. Any comments, any questions, any thoughts that you have on that? I think there's 4 valuable principles. All right, let's close in prayer, and then we'll transfer on to our prayer time. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word, and I pray that you'd help me and each of these people to be strong in our faith, and in times when our faith is tested, that we would trust you and cling to that faith and to know who you are, and to be strong enough to follow you and your purpose. We ask it in Jesus' name.